A little scruffy still. That is what it is. Scruffy is as scruffy does. All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back. Well, I'm JT Bear. This is the chat. You're on Bear Family Farms. And since there's nobody here, I get the opportunity to thank you because you are clearly watching the rewatch later on. So, yes, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I am probably going to be butchering the name of the individual I want to chat about, but I'm going to try anyway. Johann Zeitsman, I believe, is his name. I'm so bad with names, but it's not really the individual so much as his ideas that I want to discuss. And his ideas relate to breeding better cattle as defined by more efficient grass consumers, better for pasture land restoration, things like that. And yeah, I have to say, I really enjoyed listening to his lectures. I would probably find some excuse to attend one of his lectures in the off chance he was somewhere nearby, as defined by, I don't know, probably 2 hours drive, give or take. He can cover a lot of ground in mid Canada in 2 hours drive. So yeah, I'd be willing to give it maybe even 3 hours. If he showed up in Winnipeg, I'd go. But yeah, so cattle come up a lot in these conversations about farming for the future and future farmers and things like that, because they are livestock that we kind of depend on as a global civilization. We have gotten very, very used to eating beef. I, for one, have no intentions of giving it up. And his ideas on how to breed more efficient cattle and more effective cattle actually, to me, sound like he's going to be breeding tastier cattle. And if I follow kind of the guidelines that he's discussing, I too will be breeding tastier cattle. Because I've noticed, like when I was a kid going around with my stepdad to all these processing plants and all these cattle farms and stuff in BC, cows were getting bigger and bigger and kind of freakier and freakier. And it's really weird. They're grown to get really, really big and to produce a lot of really lean meat. And then they put them all in feedlots where they can't really exercise and they fatten them up. So, what was the point of growing the animal to be lean meat in the first place if you're just going to try and put the fat into that meat later on anyway? I mean, I just don't get it. That seems like some unnecessary work going on there. Like, really. I personally enjoy a nice marbled steak. Growing up, that's what I was taught was kind of the measure of a steak. You're going to be able to tell just how much flavor is in it by the quality of the marbling. And as such, that's what my dad used to get paid for, is he would go in and he'd make that cut. I think it was like 13 ribs down or something. And he had this little graph paper or transparent dry graph paper that he would put on top of it. And he could tell from the marbling and just what grade the meat was. And then he kind of got the golden handshake from that job because they came up with a new way of categorizing meat. And I suspect that's about the time that I started to not enjoy the flavor of beef as much, because I'm betting that's when they kind of took to more of this hardcore lean meat breeding program. But at the same time, industrial agriculture has been at it for a long time. So I could be very much wrong. It could just be that they didn't need him anymore, or that it came right down to it, they're just grading it differently. So whatever. I, however, still judge steaks in the store by that same system I was taught as a young man, and it all comes down to marbling for me. And it kind of sounds like Johann Zeitsman with the way he's talking about raising beef, so that they've got, he refers to the fat in them as body conditioning, and I guess that's what everybody else does too, but whatever. When you have a higher conditioning score in your cattle, basically it means they've got more fat in them and on them and in the meat and everything. So he's talking about raising cattle with a higher natural body condition. So that basically, in general, they're going to have a higher fat content. And that kind of gives them an edge in a lot of different ways because, if they've got more fat, then if the grass isn't growing, they can last a little longer. Evening Ag Wild, welcome to the chat. And they can make it through droughts. They can make it through wintertime a little bit better without losing as much muscle, because ultimately it is the muscle that we do want to produce in the beef, right? But it's going to burn the fat before it burns the muscle as it gets through the winter. And up here in Manitoba, that's particularly, that's a kind of semi-terrifying prospect of getting these animals through the winter, because I talked to, one of the gentlemen that I work with. He has a beautiful chunk of land. He's got 320 acres, but he has to work at the hog barn because he couldn't make enough money off that land raising cattle. Okay, so here I have the perfect opportunity to chat about the current cattle mindset with somebody 4 or 5 hours a day, because we don't really do much other than pass each other in the hallway and chat about bullshit, most of it. But pig in my case. But anyway, when I get past this one individual, I'll quite often ask him questions about raising cattle. And he invested heavily in tractors, and he invested heavily in this monstrous, heated, I think he said, barn, because you don't want him to lose too much condition. And he harvests at a specific weight, like 1250, I think he said was his target weight, which has nothing to do with the condition of the animal. And then you got to fatten him up. So he's paying for all that grain and stuff. And of course he's not making any money. He's putting it all back into the animal. And I mean, if you're raising cattle so that you can look at animals out in your field, then great. You don't need to make any money. They're effectively a moving picture. So that's fantastic. But most of us, I think, who are interested in cattle as an industry or as a career or as a ranch style, whatever, most of us that are interested in cattle are interested in making some money out of the deal too, if only to cover land costs, buying, more land, pasture ornaments. Yeah, right. If that's your goal, then sure, you can go out and do all that stuff. And I'm not even getting into the medications and stuff that he used to pay for those animals, right? And the medications, they're doing more damage to his land than good. He's going out and he's paying for hay in the wintertime and all of this stuff. And everything I'm listening to from, a lot of these speakers, but in particular, Johann Zeitsman here, talking about building condition into cattle. To me, it says, okay, if I've got a well-conditioned animal, then I've got an animal that's more likely to be able to winter graze. I've got an animal that's more likely to be able to go through that properly cut, silvopasture area and have a little shelter from the wind and snow by those trees, but still find the grass that's down there. And if I need to roll out the occasional bale of hay, then great. But if I need to build a big old barn to keep these animals from losing too much heat in the wintertime, then I think that's right there, gone. That's going to cost me more than my land, from what he was saying for his barn. And that's just the barn. That's not the tractor. If I was going to be going and cutting down my own hay. And I've listened to enough of Doc Hazard there that that's just, I'll pay somebody else to do it. They can take the hay off their land. I'll enroll it on my land. That'll work out just fine. But I'm not going to invest in that kind of stuff. And if your animals are well conditioned and they're going to survive the winter on less feed, and they're willing to eat kind of a more varied diet to begin with, then yeah, that seems absolutely ideal for up here in Manitoba. And Johann Zeitsman there, he's going off about large animal frame size versus smaller animal frame size and relative consumption. I forget his actual terms, but the amount they actually consume, period, in total pounds versus the amount they consume compared to their body weight. And he quotes a lot of statistics that go off about basically these really large cattle that we're trying to breed right now for the sake of the industry can't actually eat enough over the course of the day, or they're not actually eating enough, or they're not actually getting the nutrient benefit from it, or whatever you want to look at as the reason. But basically, they're not taking in enough to develop well conditioned flesh and to have that marbling, because they physically can't consume it, is his main reason. Whereas smaller animals um, can eat less than the larger animal to begin with, but still eat more of a percentage of their body weight, and as such are more likely to put on some of their weight as fat. And that fat is, as we're talking about, it's the conditioning. It's making it through the droughts, it's making it between, through the winter months. It's how your cattle really are going to survive. And from what I remember, yeah, it's where the flavor is at. I love a well marbled steak. So to me, that seems like a win. Like, if everybody's going out right now, I mean, it's no wonder the cattle industry is in such a state of disarray. It's terrible, because if everybody's ranching like my friend at the barn is ranching, then pennies on the pound for profit, and that is unacceptable. And that is probably why so many younger generations are going, yeah, no, I'm not going to be a rancher. Thanks. I'm going to go get a desk job in the city. I'll be a desk jockey. I'll make twice as much. I don't have any of the responsibilities. I don't have any of the heartache. And you just have fun with your cows, Dad. Um, I think a lot of people are leaving the industry because it doesn't look like it's profitable. But if you do it with well-conditioned animals, and you're using them to enhance your property, which is to say you're not letting them free graze 365 and just selectively take the bits and pieces that they want because that's the highest nutrient stuff. You're actually considering the mob grazing, you're using electric fence, you're moving them around, you're kind of forcing them to consume more of what's available in your pasture. Yeah, they are going to get a lesser overall quality of nutrient because they're eating a wider variety of things. But at the same time, as they're eating that wider variety of things, those plants are made up out of different minerals and nutrients. So they are going to be getting those minerals and nutrients, and they're going to be healthier animals because of it. So when you're looking at good evening, Babette. When you're looking at avoiding inputs like ivermectin, for parasites, basically parasite control. There's lice, there's worms, there's all kinds of stuff to worry about. But I want to avoid using that stuff because I want any dung beetles that are on my property to be happy, healthy, reproductive dung beetles, and I want those nutrients sucked into my ground. I want to build topsoil so that it's absolutely unquestionable when farmers go by that have been driving by whatever my field ends up being for 50 years. They go, well, that place used to look like crap, but it's looking all right now. Maybe that Mr. Bear there, maybe he got an idea. I should see what he's doing. What's he doing with all them funny little fat cattle anyway? I mean, why doesn't he just grow himself a proper Angus? I know there are going to be questions, and I'm not worried about that. I've got answers. Maybe they're not right, but they're my answers, and they feel right for me, and they feel right for my situation. And I think that's all anybody really can hope for in any given situation, is when they come to a decision, they make the action or the choice that feels right for them in that time period, and ultimately hope it's the best one for the long run. But yeah, so don't see any questions. Did anybody go out and actually listen to any of this Johann Zeitsman stuff? I picked up that he's got a book out there. I'd like to track down a little more information and get access to some of these charts that he's referencing. I find it quite interesting that he can go, well, this animal's 12 months old, so if you measure its hip height, we can determine that, at I think 131 or whatever, or 12 months old, it's going to be 750 kilograms when it finishes out. It's like, man, how the hell can you tell that from measuring up the side of an animal? That's pretty cool. You got to have spent a lot of time looking into it before you can come up with those kind of charts and stuff. And apparently he used to breed bulls. I've got a lot of questions about breeding, inbreeding, interbreeding. At what point in the animal husbandry chain. Have you started inbreeding with your cattle? Because I definitely don't want to be doing that. But I do think that I'm going to be breeding for some pretty specific qualities in my animals, because I do want those shorter, stockier, chunkier, well filled out, well marbled, grass fed animals, because I do not want something that has to go off to a feedlot. If if I've got it to pay basically per pound to put meat on my meat animal, then I'm not making any money there. So that just seems like a really bad business plan and bad business structure to me. There need to be changes in that, and I am more than happy to start my cattle endeavor in the future, hopefully the near future, but in the future, um, basically on the cheap and doing it as grass fed as possible. If I have to build some sort of shelter for my cattle, it will be three-sided at best, might have a roof on it, part of it. And if I end up building a structure for my cattle, it'll probably be to test some earthship type concepts, tire packing, things like that. Justin Rhodes does it that way. Is he entirely grass fed with his cattle? I haven't actually watched too much of his stuff. In the early years, I really felt like he was doing family videos more of his kids than of his homesteading. I know in recent days, weeks, months, YouTube has really cracked down on kids in videos and things like that. And I've seen a couple lately that look, well, they're just kind of a different format, and I've really enjoyed that. And he's done a couple of tours of Joel Saladin's place that I have enjoyed watching those. Oh, in case anybody's wondering, this is the mead we got to talking about last week. I got to thinking about last week's chat, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'm just taking some of that upstairs. Take the edge off, relax a little bit. So Babette, I caught your comment there about you're not going to be raising any cattle anytime soon. It's like, I got to say though, and I think I did say it in my comment, it's some wonderfully natural compostable materials that could really, really build up your gardens for you. I'm not sure how your neighbors would feel about it, but hey, if you can. Oh, excuse me. So let's see, back to the topic. And the topic is breeding cattle, and more importantly, breeding cattle for better body condition. There are a few people out there who have mentioned on the lecture circuit that a lot of grass-fed cattle is being, we'll call it harvested, too soon. It's not properly finished. And what they're talking about there is, again, they're talking about body conditioning, and they're talking about the fat content in the animal. And there are a few places apparently where you can really quite easily see just how close the animal is to finished. And they say the tail head, which, while I haven't checked this out, I'm pretty sure they're talking about where it joins the hips, not the actual like very end of it there. Not the tip of the tail, but the tail head. Apparently you need like 3 good wrinkles of fat on there before your animal is really finished off. And I think it's Greg Judy. It says if that animal isn't waddling when it walks, it's not finished yet. So there are a lot of folks out there that will agree with the idea that meat, beef in particular, needs to have a certain amount of fat in it before it can really be an enjoyable dinner plate. I have a bet in the garden, a little hay at times. He has more on homesteading. Well, a little hay can't be avoided, right? Like, you got to feed it when there's no grass around. So that is what it is. It's just some of the expenses that people put into gathering their hay is crazy. I don't think Justin Rhodes has done any of that from what I've seen. And I really do like his approach to livestock gardening and just kind of living the adventure of farming and treating farming as an adventure, as compared to, I think there are a lot of people out there who treat it as a chore, treat it as a job. It's a task. It's something I gotta do to get myself through the day. And, there are others out there like myself who are chomping at the bit. I would love to have to wake up in the morning and deal with my own animals instead of going to deal with somebody else's animals. I would love to have to figure out where I'm going to rotate these for the day or the week or the month, or to ask myself, do I have enough hay to make it through the winter? Have I cleared enough pasture land? Have I done this? All of these various things that go along with Alan Savory and his holistic management. I would love to have to sit down in the morning with a cup of coffee or tea and just answer that list of questions, get things taken care of, and get my cattle and animals just on the move and out there and doing things. And probably going to be starting with sheep. And I do have to wonder if Johann Zeitsman's theories on body conditioning in cattle, if those kind of apply in general to sheep, and will those apply in general to other types of livestock? Am I looking for shorter, fatter goats too? Am I looking for shorter, fatter sheep? I don't know. I kind of like a big stocky chicken. I've got the comparison there. We've got some really skinny chickens outside, and we got some nice chubby chickens outside, and the chubby chickens seem to be a lot happier. So that's good. I use chickens to build my garden. Yeah, well, chickens are great, right? And probably a lot better choice for a more urban situation like you've got. I mean, really, in theory, I'm only supposed to have 3 chickens here. I've got rather more than that, but there's no way I can start sneaking in livestock, is it testing my theories on raising smaller cattle by raising them here on half an acre. Right? That sounds like I'll be buying an awful lot of hay, dealing with an awful lot of manure that's not breaking down in time. And when they start mooing, yeah, the neighbor's probably going to get a little bit more upset than just some clucking off in the distance. That could be, you know, ducks in the field, assuming we still had ducks in the field. Most of them have been shot or gone south by now. So that is what that is. But I do find it quite interesting how he, getting back to, Johann Zeitsman, how he basically calls out the cattle industry on doing it almost exactly opposite of how we need to do it for the future. And as I mentioned in Thursday's video on this gentleman, I think the ideas that he presents pair particularly well with the ideas that Alan Savory presents, with putting more numbered, like higher numbers of animals onto the land to restore the pastures, to restore the grasslands, rebuild a lot of habitat that we have trashed with our very greedy human farming natures, trying to extract as much as we can from the land at any given moment without paying too much concern to long-term functionality of the land. Are we making it so that it will be better in the future, or are we making it so it'll be worse? Are we making it so it stays about the same? A lot of current farming is almost hydroponics in the field. They go out there, they till, they spray the fertilizer, they harvest it. They don't even worry about, what's 6 inches down, 12 inches down, 18 inches down. And I want the ranching and the farming that I do to worry about that. I want to build those biological colonies in the soil. I want to have good, happy, healthy animals on top of it. I want them eating healthy greens out of it, so that when I eat them or sell them to market, they in turn are good, healthy meat. I was thinking about it the other day. I had a quick burger after work. Tuesday's burger day, because I work a little longer on Tuesdays. So yeah, I just find myself craving that extra energy from the protein of burger day. But yeah, I was thinking about it, and iron has gotten, there's like 50% less iron in beef nowadays than 50, 60 years ago. And that is kind of outrageous. Like, one of the things that I'm looking for when I go for a burger or for a steak is I'm looking for that iron, rebuild my blood, rebuild my energy levels, and kind of make me a little less bitchy too, really. But if it's not there, well, it's there, but it's only half as much of it there. Then I've got to eat twice as much meat to get that mineral that I'm going for. And the body craves all kinds of elements and minerals and things. And most of the time, we don't even know that our body's craving it. We just get the urge to go eat some type of food that our body has recognized as a source of this thing. So it sends a signal to our brain. Our brain says, shuffle through. You want peanut butter. Go grab yourself a spoon of peanut butter. You'll be fine. Go make yourself some eggs. Go have some toast. Whatever it is that you're craving, right? Maybe it's a salad day. Some days I come home from work and it's like, I am making a spin dip. But there you go. That's another craving iron sort of thing. And once again, the iron in spinach ain't what it was, man. It ain't what it was. And it's getting to a point these days where it's almost not even safe to buy greens at the grocery store. There's another, what was it, E. coli, some sort of recall again on California lettuce. I'm sure this affects you more than a lot of us. So you're probably way more aware. I think it was iceberg. I don't know. Shock scrolled across it the other day in her Facebook feed, and it's like, man, it's crazy. And people wonder why I fully support the idea of gardening if you can, even if it's a little tiny aquaponic garden in your basement. Garden if you can. Punky, hi, welcome. Yeah, buying greens commercially grown freaks me out. Yeah, nasty stuff on it, nasty stuff in it, and the important stuff ain't there. So it's like you got to eat so much more of it to get what you really want out of it. Yeah. It also tastes gross. True story. I cannot eat a grocery store strawberry and feel good about it. I I don't even bother. Like, Shocks will get them, and she'll be like, "Oh, look at these big, plump, juicy strawberries," and I'm like, "Yeah, okay." Cut it open. It's just not the same. I got absolutely ruined for those when it came to the aquaponic greenhouse we had back in BC. But they'd be so warm and juicy and fresh, and so, now I want a strawberry. Actually, got some of those terrible grocery store strawberries in here. Maybe see the light pink in that. Not really, but I'm betting I would have gotten a lot more flavor. Flavor. I'm betting I would have gotten a lot more flavor if I had some homegrown ones in there. But it is what it is. So, yes. Let's see. Back to Zeitsman. Punky, I don't know. Did you get a chance to watch any of the lectures on breeding cattle? I'm thinking it's probably not really up your alley. But the thing is, with this grassland restoration thing, like I was talking about, having more of the smaller animals, I think, does a lot more for rebuilding the pastures and getting out of the habit of selectively grazing the land down to nothing and non-productivity and just weeds, basically. So if you have more smaller animals doing that, and you can take one of these big old Angus bull up here and be like 2,200 pounds. They get huge, but it takes 6-7 acres or whatever to provide enough for that one animal, and that is with highly selective grazing, of course. And okay, so if it takes that many acres for that monster, and a full size Dexter bull, I'm stuck on the Dexters, it's going to be 1,000 pounds tops. So I could get 2 miles and 8 hooves running around in that same amount of land. Not quite as much meat, but I'm going to get a better meat out of it, because as Johann goes on about, these smaller animals have a much better chance consuming the exact same material of putting on that extra weight that is good body condition, good fat, good marbling in steaks and your roasts and all that stuff. And it's at the end of the day, it's about rebuilding the land. Yeah, I want to make profit when I get into it, and yeah, I am going to fill my freezer. But ultimately, and this, I last week or the week before, someone was asking me about why I'm going to be building a herd or what my herd goals are, and I kind of went off about it's about making it bigger, about making it bigger, about making it bigger, and not necessarily becoming a commercial sort of livestock producer. Because I just want to grow the herd and get to a point where I'm making just enough money from them that I can buy more land and they can work on it and restore it as well. And, I have no intentions of going out and cutting down, clear cutting huge chunks of timbered areas or anything. Yeah, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to do timber stand improvements, and I'm going to take down dead trees, dying trees, things like that. And I'm going to turn it into silvopasture so that my animals have somewhere to winter graze where, they're protected from the winds and snows and stuff. But ultimately, it's about improving the land. It's about getting carbon into the soil. It's about building topsoil. I have missed a few comments here. Punky, I am interested in regenerative and sustainable livestock practices. Even it's unlikely something I'll ever use again. It is interesting though, right? Like the fact that these people are out there and trying to do something about it makes a big difference. Babette, I grow my own and it's romaine lettuce. Yeah, so much better for you. Iceberg's just kind of crap anyway. Punky, I missed a lot of the discussions. What sort of livestock are you looking at having? Ultimately, I am looking at having as many different types of livestock as I can, but as long as I work at the hog barn, hogs are out for biosecurity reasons. So I'm looking at cattle, sheep, a few goats, maybe a donkey or two to keep them company. Obviously, I want chickens because I've got the chickens now, so it's not like I'm going to quit having chickens. But I'm going to be looking at them a little differently once I have ruminant livestock out there, because I will be using them like Joel Saladin does to kind of go out and clean up after the cattle and the goats and stuff and get those fly larvae out of the patties and piles. And yeah, they're probably going to take out a few dung beetles in their journeys, but such is life. So yeah, I want to have a wide variety of livestock, but basically things that will kind of between them all consume everything in general, and as they leave their blessings behind them, build up better land and access different seeds in the soil, and hopefully build up biodiversity above and below the soil line. So that'll be good. This PC is having a bad day today. Oh, yeah, well, Black Friday sales are coming up. I like to take that opportunity to remind my computers that they can be replaced. Most of them don't have any idea how little is in my bank account, so they don't know that it's an empty threat. But, the desktop downstairs, it gets threatened a lot. I also threaten it with the crossbow when it's having really bad days. But since I can't afford to go through with that right now, its execution has been stayed. But at some point, there will probably be an outdoor video where crossbow meets that PC, because there have just been a lot of frustrating moments. I don't think they can do too much to recycle. I think it's 8 years old now, an 8-year-old PCU or CPU. Yeah, it's garbage. There's not much they can do with it. So I will probably destroy it. It would be fun. But back to livestock. I'm really interested in probably starting off with sheep, just because, they're not the climbers that goats are. They're not the large animals that most cattle are. I mean, yeah, granted, my cattle that I'm interested in are half pints at best, but excuse me, they're also not the financial investment that the larger livestock are. So I should be able to get into sheep fairly affordably when the time comes, because another one of the gentlemen that I work with, he raises both hair and wool sheep. So, when he does his lambing in the spring, I can just make arrangements to basically pick them up at cost and probably even have them dropped off to whatever land at the time. I have toyed with the idea of trying to pick up a couple in this next lambing season, which is going to be spring, and run them on our half acre here until somebody complains, and then harvest some lamb. But I'm just going to I know I'm going to get too attached to them to be able to actually, yeah, okay, the time has come. We're going to harvest you off now. And I also know that I've stood up and talked against everybody currently sitting on town council, and none of them can really out talk me. So I would probably make a stink about it, and that would just probably not be good in the long run. Better to just wait it out. Land will find itself manifesting for me. It'll be in that price range. Like I found 160 acres on a river was $40,000, $250 an acre, right? Like if only I could have just went, well, I only need 5 acres. Can I do 1250? Come on. Obviously I couldn't act on it at the time, and I still can't, but I know I'll find another one of those situations eventually. And right now I'm trying to get myself into a position to be able to act on it when I find it. And then, yeah, probably sheep to start with. And yeah, maybe some cattle after that. There seem to be a lot of dexters around. And then once I'm actually on the property and able to kind of keep an eye on things, that's when I'll start getting into goats, and I'll add the chickens and things like that. But first it'll be things that I can go out, move the fence, move the animals, and be an hour away, and they'll be fine, really. So yeah. Punky, if I still had land, I'd seriously consider sheep. Relatively easy to care for, feed, and they have value outside of meat. Yeah, well, so do cattle. There's leather and bone meal, and there are other things that go along with that. But yeah, sheep are great. They're really relatively easy to feed. They eat a much higher percentage of their body weight every day than cattle do, but that's still nothing. It's like maybe 2 or 3 pounds of hay a day per ewe. No big deal, right? You can get like a 50-pound little cube of hay and have that last you 25 days for one sheep. So great. Um, I was really shocked and saddened by your move away from that place, but you've got to do what you've got to do, and you felt you had to do that at the time, so respect. Though, like all livestock, it's more efficient if you're willing to eat them as well. Well, it is, it really is. But if you are not interested in eating them, then yeah, you can harvest the wool. Doesn't have a great market value these days, but it does still have a value. And if you're willing to do the old fashioned homesteader route and spin it up, and you can add secondary value to it by turning it into wool, or even further value by turning it into sweaters or blankets or whatever. There are lots of ways to make use out of things like that to increase your profits. But living on just wool, it would be, I think, almost impossible. You'd have to have so many sheep nowadays with so many synthetic fabrics and things out there. It's very hard to be a wool producer full time. But again, like I was saying in the beginning of this chat, there are so many cattle ranchers out there that pay so much to have the cattle, to feed the cattle, to raise the cattle, to house the cattle, to gather the hay for the cattle, and then to grain feed these cattle, as you yourself have mentioned. That at the end of the day, they're getting pennies back on their dollar spent, that they might as well be pasture ornaments, I believe is what Ag Wild described them as, and that's the perfect thing. So if you're just looking for something to enhance your yard, sheep are great for that. But if you need to pull a profit out of it, wool is probably not going to cover the cost of hay. Grass can be gotten for free because it's chlorophyll, sunlight, roots, soil. So yeah, as long as you've got a good growing season, 365, it shouldn't cost you too much to keep those ornaments out there. But at the end of the day, ultimately, a person needs to make money out of their business, or it's a hobby. If it's a hobby, great. But if it's a business, it's a business. In my case, it will be kind of both, but it's a hobby that has grown into a business, and it's also a passion because I'm passionate about rebuilding the grasslands. I'm passionate about raising meat that has known love and is healthy for my family. So, and those are my priorities. So it does kind of fall under hobby because I only want to make enough money to keep the place afloat and maybe buy more land so I can keep improving it and get more cattle so I can keep improving more land. And it'll be a fine line percentage of what gets sold each and every year out of the livestock, but it will only be as much as is needed because the goal is to keep the livestock on the land, kind of like yard ornaments. but just barely productive, And that's one thing too. This is part of why my plans now include a delay for pigs, because as long as I'm working at the barn, I'm working indoors, 365. Yeah, I don't get holidays off because pigs don't take holidays from farrowing. That's just they if they're gonna lay those piglets, they're dropping those piglets. That's all there is to it. Um, but it's a good steady source of income, so that allows me the opportunity to have them as pasture ornaments for that first little while at least, and not be dependent on the profit, and not have those stressors that drive most ranchers to buying massive amounts of hay or putting up all of this infrastructure and stuff that I feel isn't necessarily necessary. Yeah, this is why I can't justify livestock. The cost benefit ratio is too out of whack. Well, it is, right? Like you've had chickens, so you're in the same boat I am. It can be a wonderfully co-beneficial, I want to say, that doesn't feel right, but relationship to raise some livestock, like with the chickens, because they'll give you the eggs every day, and really, it doesn't take, you don't have to sell your eggs for a lot to cover the cost of feed. So that is a really easy sort of business scenario to break even with. And that is great because, yeah, you don't have to cull those animals most of the time to make your money. Sometimes you do have to cull them to keep your profits up. Like I'm in a situation right now that's breaking my heart a little bit because I named them. Never name your livestock. Never name your livestock. But I made the mistake of naming the first hens that came into our property here. And we are now at a point where it is blatantly obvious, because of the 10 new chicks that we got, just how desperately these retirement hens need to be culled before we go into winter. Betty looks so scrawny and little, and she's not laying, but she looks really, really haggard. Even Bunty is looking really worse for the wear and tiny compared to these, big, productive hybrid birds that we've got that were bred to be winter hardy. They are just going to go into this winter and not even bat an eyelash. Whereas those older girls are going into this winter, they're going to eat at least twice as much because I don't run heat lamps out there. So they go through a lot more food, and they're going to suffer at least twice as much because they are that much smaller. They don't have that. Again, we're back to the body conditioning. They don't have the fat reserves that the larger birds, in this case, larger is better, that the larger birds have to see them through the winter. And they're going to suffer. So I know tragically that I need to cull these birds, and I need to go, okay, well, thank you for your efforts. We appreciate the eggs, but now you are soup because that is profitability. And, you're consuming, so you're costing, but you're not producing. You're not adding to it. So once they're no longer adding to the equation, I have to be responsible about it, but I'm just not looking forward to it. And I've come up with so many different reasons to put it off at this point. I mean, I'm a little more confident now after the whole duck ordeal because at least I've plucked a duck. I'd never plucked anything before in my life. I'd never decapitated a bird, and none of that stuff. So that was all baby steps towards being able to do this. But I'm just not ready yet, and I need to be. I hated killing my animals, hated it, whether I named them or not, and it never got any easier. Killing wild animals is a bit easier, so I still ponder hunting. Well, and wild animals have known a good life. So I think that's part of it too. And like when it comes to my larger, see, now this is the kill per meal ratio that I've discussed in one of the previous videos. When it comes to larger livestock, I already know I'm going to feel less bad about taking that life because that life will provide for so many others. It is the greater, to the benefit of the greater good. If I take down 1,000-pound, steer, we'll say 1,000-pound Dexter steer, so he's going to be big and beefy for his size. I'm only going to get 43% back of that as, like edible kind of carcass from what I understand. So still 430 pounds. That's a lot of good, healthy energy food that I can share with the people around me that I care about, or I can put on the market, and I'm one of those guys that I care about my customers too. So whatever, these are going to end up being people that I care about. But with the smaller livestock, like with the chickens, one meal, because these birds are so small, these girls, so it's going to be a soup. Maybe between the two of us, we can stretch that over 2, 3 meals. But it's really, I'm not looking forward to taking 3 lives for 3 meals. I am much more intrigued about the idea of taking one life for 430 of them. So makes sense. Kill versus meal. Yeah. Great up on the homestead. And every year we got a piglet, raised it until it was huge and had a slaughter. And that's where most of the meat we ate came from. Yeah. Well, it's amazing how big a piglet can get in just a few months. They start off as these little itty bitty cute, just adorable bacon seeds, and their little tails just a wiggling, their ears are flopping around, and they are freaking adorable. But in just a few months, these things can get monstrous. Like, wow, it is amazing. It is amazing. I'm still looking forward to that bonus, actually. Everybody that works at the barn gets a hog for the freezer. But right now we're having a problem with our gilt suppliers. So we're not getting any fresh hogs to breed in the barn for at least 6 months. So right now, we are living in a state of no unnecessary culls. I am happy as a pig in shit at work right now because, in my opinion, they cull a lot unnecessarily. There are some beautiful swine. Some of these sows, they're 4.5, almost 5 years old. They've got no hoof issues. They've got no health issues. They're giving us high numbers of piglets, but they've been culling them off because, well, sooner or later, they're going to go downhill. And I'm just like, man, you're killing me. She's such a good productive animal. Yeah, well, we get 200 from the butcher for her, and it only costs 200 to get one. So, it's all the same. And I'm like, no, it's not the same. She's still productive. My boss and I have had a few interesting chats about this. And he thinks I'm coming around to his point of view because I'm pretending to. But ultimately, I am enjoying this no unnecessary kills right now. Optimistically cynical. I like your name. Pigs don't like to be in shit. I do know that. Yeah, I do know that. That said, I also see a lot of piglets with poop all over their face when they had plenty of space to not have it all over their face. So I don't know. Maybe those piglets are just standing in the wrong place at the wrong time because we are a farrowing barn, right? Like they've only got so much room to move, but they have room. They don't have to be in it if they don't want to. Sorry, I must go. Got to prep for American Thanksgiving. Thanks for the chat. Well, happy Thanksgiving to you, Punky. Thanks for joining in. I do appreciate that, especially considering I know sensitivities and subjects and stuff. But yeah, happy American Thanksgiving to pretty much all of you. Is that this week or is that next week? Ours is in October, so I get all confused. Between we go Thanksgiving, Halloween, don't go Christmas yet. It's okay to go Christmas. That's tomorrow. Well, happy Thanksgiving, everybody, and I hope you all have a wonderful one. Are you guys? Well, I guess if you're heading off to do your Thanksgiving stuff, is no more questions there. But yeah, I do wish everyone out there a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, and I hope with all of my heart that everybody out there takes the opportunity to really stop and think about all the things that, especially here in North America, we have to be grateful for. I think we take a lot for granted that a lot of people would kill for. So, yes, happy Thanksgiving. On that note, I am thankful for this mug. Uncle sent us mugs. And yeah. This thing works insanely well. That tea is still ridiculously hot. I've been waiting for an hour for that to get to a drinkable temperature, and it's not quite there yet. So needless to say, I can't use that on the route to work. I got this terribly pathetic thermal mug that I use for the road to work because it cools my coffee off faster than a ceramic mug would. It's useless. But that said, if I lose it in the car, or it gets forgotten somewhere, whatever. If coffee freezes in it, if the coffee freezes and it breaks in the console, that would suck. So anyway, we've got people coming and going. I don't know if anybody still wants to chat about Johann Zeitsman or cattle breeding or livestock breeding or any of that stuff. Pasture land restoration, pigs, hog barns, industrial agriculture. Oh, I've got so many negative things that I would happily say about industrial agriculture, but I have made promises that some things will never be mentioned on air. And I intend to hold to those promises at least as long as I count on them for employment. So, yeah. But very much enjoying the no unnecessary kill policy. And that's how I intend to run my ranch. I will cull because we are the predators in our herd. I will cull animals that have health issues. Anybody who's particularly riddled with parasites, I'm not going to medicate my herd when I can cull one animal. So fill the freezer, send it off to town, send it off to camp, whatever happens to it, happens to it. And that's unfortunate for herd size and overall grassland restoration, but it is at the same time quite fortunate for grassland restoration because it would be a lot worse if I medicated. Just the things that happen to our ground-bound insects when we medicate our livestock. It's not good. It's not good. It's another one of those things that Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, was going off about, medications, pesticides, things like that. And, not saying that all of them are inherently bad, but definitely saying that all of them need to be used with a great deal more respect than we currently do use them. So that is fascinating to me. And that actually is part of why I'm interested in the Dexter breed of cattle for my long-term breeding projects. I actually have 3 breeds in mind right now, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to work out. I can only get access to one of them here in Manitoba. Another one, there's access to either way over in Alberta, which is a rather lengthy drive, or off over in Ontario, which, while it seems like the province next door, is actually a pretty lengthy drive too. And I'm not quite sure where in North America to find the 3rd breed because they are a French breed of cattle, apparently, that used to be raised by monks. So Aubrac, or Aubrac. But apparently they were never fed grains at any point in their history. So their muscle building, fat development, body conditioning due to natural grassland diets is unaffected by man's meddling. So great. I don't know if that was just because the monks were being cheap, or if they had some idea of what was coming, or they wanted to stick to God's plan, or whatever. Whether you look at it as Mother Nature or the Creator or God Almighty, it's a very interesting and complicated system that we humans find ourselves in the middle of. And we're trying to manage it like we would any of our businesses. It's not working terribly well. So we need to step back, look at a larger portion of the picture, which again takes us back to the holistic management with Alan Savory. But we need to look back, look at a larger portion of the picture, and just look at how nature or God or the Creator set things up and work within that system. If it's more natural for cattle to give birth in the summer because there's more nutrition to be had for them, to make the milk, to feed the young, to rebuild the muscle, to rebuild their fat stores. Why are we breeding so that we're having our calves in spring? Oh yeah, we're breeding spring calves so that they're bigger at the fall sale. We can get a few extra pounds on them, maybe 100, 150 extra pounds at a buck and a half a pound. That's an extra 100, 150 bucks. We need that money. We got to breed them cattle to be big. But my goal with cattle is to take them from, and this is specifically referring to the ones that will eventually end up in the freezer or at market, is to take them from bred cow that has been bred with my goals in mind, all the way through the calf stage, past the yearling stage, fully to finished beef. And then, yeah, slaughter and or, freezer or market at that time. So I'm not in any way, shape, or form worried about how big my cattle are going to be in the fall. I'm worried about when they have the right amount of fat on them and they have been around for at least, well, in the case of some of these breeds that I'm looking at, 30 months, they're saying, for some of them to get to that finished stage. So, they're all going to be tracked for age. They're going to be tracked for conditioning. They're going to be tracked for a lot of different things. It is generally the steers that are going to be getting, freezer and market bound. But that is the nature of the cattle industry. So that's not just on me. That's on the industry. But they make good burgers. They make good steaks. It's all good. Can't have too many bulls in the field any more than you can have too many roosters in the hen house. So one has to control that. And well, turning a bull into a steer and turning a steer into a steak is how we tend to control that. And it's how we ensure good qualities in the animals that we're breeding. If this little guy looks like he's going to have the stockier head and he's going to fill out to a better frame and, look like 5 pounds of sugar in a 4-pound bag, then yeah, we're maybe going to keep him intact. Maybe let him grow up to be a bull, see how he finishes out. But, if this other guy's looking like he's going to be big and lean and lanky, well, then we can just snip him because I have no interest in those genetics. Any cow that's growing up to be lean is going to have a real hard time putting on the fats that she needs to have good body condition to be able to rebreed. And body condition is a big factor in whether or not a cow will breed successfully. And if she doesn't breed successfully, she's a financial liability. She's costing you money for that year. If she does breed successfully, she is creating another life. That life will either go towards pasture rehabilitation or that life will go towards market, and that becomes profit. And so body condition, at least to a point where they're going to rebreed, is super important. Holler 85, howdy. Spring calves makes 18-month-old butcher in the fall, so you don't have to feed him through the winter. Yeah, well, okay. And that kind of gets back to the standard sort of thing. People are really, really worried about feeding those animals in the wintertime and keeping condition on them and not losing too much muscle tone. You want to make sure that your cattle are well housed so they don't lose too much body heat, so that they're not burning through their fat reserves, so they're not burning up the muscle when they run out of their fat reserves and shrinking over the course of wintertime. And Johann Zeitsman, with the lectures that I've been listening to, he's discussing how to breed cattle so that they have that better conditioning, and you have to be way less worried about them in the wintertime. And he refers to winter and drought feeding as rumen supplementation. That was surprisingly hard to say, as compared to like full-on feeding. And what I take from that, as my interpretation of it, is he's not saying you need to feed your cattle every day, every few days. Just keep those bacteria active, keep them alive, and let them burn their fat stores over the winter. So yes, that's probably why the big market does it. Well, that's exactly why the big market does it. They grow up those big lean animals, and then they send them to the feedlots and fatten them up, get that marbling in there. But to do it that way with those big animals, they're worried about, as Mr. Zeitsman puts it, profit per animal versus profit per acre. And I like the profit per acre idea a lot better, especially since I'm interested in more hooves, more mouths, more little cow pies all over the yard, more dung beetles being fed. I want more. So if I'm able to achieve proper land management, double my hoof numbers, and still not really stress my pasture because of the amount that they're consuming, because they're not these monstrous animals, then great. And if I can get away with not stressing my finances by buying grain or buying huge amounts of winter hay, yeah, I'm gonna have to buy some, undoubtedly, but I am not gonna buy huge amounts. And may I may experience some shrinkage in my cattle throughout the winter. We get -40, -55 with wind chill, but that's really only for a month or two. The rest of it, it's like -20, -30. We've already gotten -20 nights, and I see cattle out in the field. They're a little furrier, and they're not prancing around all happy and stuff. They're wandering around looking for hay in the fields, or munching off of one of the bales, because we got one person on my way home from work who does bale grazing, and it's really interesting watching the calves go at those bales while the older cows are out, and they're just out in the yard, basically free ranging it. They are rotating them through different little pastures and such, but they're dealing with the winter based on whatever conditioning that they have, and those animals are going to shrink a little bit too. So at least I know I'm not the only person around who is focusing on raising cattle in a more natural way. So I will get frowned upon, but I won't get frowned upon by everybody. And that one who isn't frowning will go, oh, thank God I'm not alone anymore. So that's fantastic. But there are certain breeds that you can choose that have more marbling in them to begin with. And as Zeitsman points out, these tend to be smaller framed breeds. Highland, Happy, hey, nice to see you, man. Highland cattle, one of my favorites, is Scottish Highland cattle, the hippie cows. Everybody's got the horns and they got the bangs down, and they'd never make it on a military base, but they would pass the drug test with flying colors as long as it's written. Those typical Highland furry little cattle. They are wonderfully well marbled meat. They condition really, really well. They're a little larger than the Dexters that I'm kind of interested in, but yeah, Highlands are one of the breeds that I'm interested in. These Albrechts apparently as well. They very much put on the extra weight. They don't gain as fast as these monster freak cows that are the big market cows, but the muscle that they gain is laced with those fats, and those fats are burned before the muscle in the wintertime. And so when they're shrinking, they're losing fat, not muscle mass. So by the time you actually harvest that animal, you've developed a wholly different flavor in it than you would have through a standard commercial beef or beef, or through standard commercial cattle, whatever you want to call it. So I like the idea of that more textured, marbly, rich, flavorful, almost gamey. Now I recognize a lot of people think that's a terrible word, but almost gamey meat, because it's had a wider diet. A lot of animals are raised on one or two type of grasses growing in the pasture, and out of that they'll choose the one that they like. So they have a very specific taste to them. And I bet if proper research was done on it, we could find out that cattle raised on ryegrass taste different from cattle raised on rye and alfalfa, taste different from, I'm just going to throw haze out here, alfalfa and timothy taste different from, buckwheat. And I'm also willing to bet that in a blind taste test, cattle raised in a multi-species mix, like the gentleman at work, he's got a 9-species mix planted for his sheep. So he's at least got one step in the right direction for his ranch. But 9 species. Now, out of that, his sheep are very picky. They only eat 1 or 2. What does this tell me? This tells me he's not mob grazing those animals. So he's missing out on an opportunity. And once I've been working there a little bit longer, I'll talk to him about that and maybe come out to his ranch and show him how he could be using the infrastructure that he already has more effectively, so that he doesn't need to buy as much hay, and his sheep are eating more of his pasture, and he's not finding that his plants are spreading farther and farther out, because he's getting to a point, from what I understand, he's getting to a point where he's going to need to till up and replant and basically recultivate his pasture. That's not right. That's not how that's supposed to work at all. Pastures should get thicker and fuller with time if they're being grazed correctly. But if you're in a continual grazing system, which aside from winter, and I understand he kind of brings his sheep in for his husbandry and all that stuff over the winter time, so he can kind of keep an eye on them and all of that. But from thaw to snowfall, his sheep are pretty much out there just kind of wandering the land, eating what they please. And yeah, needless to say, he's not necessarily making as much money with that enterprise as he might like to. And in my opinion, he's not making half of the money that he's capable of. Because if he looked into some of this stuff that, well, I'm sharing with you guys, right? And I'm trying to encourage the conversation on, then yeah, he could be doing a lot better just by making a couple of tiny changes. You go home from work, you spend what, half an hour moving the fence line, moving the sheep. You follow some of Doc Hazard's ideas on training cattle. I'm sure it'll work for sheep too. Almost all creatures on the planet are motivated by food. It's a pretty simple one. So if you get them conditioned to hear a sound and recognize food, what was it? Pavlov's dogs. They would hear the bell. They would get fed at the bell. So when they heard a bell, they would start to salivate. It's that simple, okay? Like, you can train almost any livestock to want to go to that gate, want to go through that gate, and want to experience the new pasture. And it really doesn't take long before the herd realizes that when you are moving them, yes, it's a minor inconvenience, but they are getting a whole new pasture land to graze on. It's new buffet. Excuse me. It's fresh food. There's no feces on it anywhere. When you get right down to it, I suspect animals prefer to be treated in this way as compared to being left to graze. But I don't know. I'm not an animal psychologist. I am just an animal who happens to like fresh food every day and thinks that most animals do too. Slicey Slicer, good day. How is it with you, sir? I am good. Thank you for joining the chat. We're just kind of discussing livestock, breeding cattle, and lecturers, and restoring agriculture, or restoring our agricultural lands. And to some extent, maybe even restoring some lands that are no longer useful for agriculture, which is, again, part of why I'm interested in Zeitsman's theories on breeding. And again, this ties back into the Alan Savory thing, because I am looking for farmed out land. I am looking for non-productive pasture. I have to convince a farmer that it's costing them money to have that section of land, that quarter section of land, and then I have to try and farm and ranch on it. So I am this close. Ultimately, my goal is this close to basically trying to rehabilitate desert land. And you think, oh, he's in Canada, he's in Manitoba, it's the land of snow, how can it be that bad? Well, if the water cycle is broken, it doesn't really matter how much snow or rain you get. The water cycle is still broken. And that is one of the major things that running livestock on land as a rehabilitation effort does, is it can help restore the water cycle instead of it all running off the land and filling up the creeks and filling up the sloughs and making those green ponds. It sinks into the land. And when it sinks into the land, it makes green life and green plants, and it grows and it transpires into the air and goes up and becomes rain that again falls somewhere else, where hopefully it is being caught and is working properly to build the climate that we know and love, and not to run off and become part of a cycle of droughts and floods. Because when the land is not holding the water, then what happens? All of the water rushes, it hits the rivers, it goes downriver, you got a flood downriver. And then what's the result upriver? The result upriver is we got no water in our fields. We got a drought. We got nothing growing in our crops. Our pastures ain't growing. We got nothing. Best thing we can do is we can go out, we can drill a well, and we can irrigate. We can put those big old sprinklers out there. Now, I love driving down highways and watching those big old sprinklers and just kind of imagining lying there in the sun underneath all of that. But you wouldn't actually want to get hit by that. Because there's some pretty powerful equipment. Now, to do that, we are drilling holes, probably not overly helpful. We are running some sort of a generator to provide power. So we're consuming a fuel and we're producing a waste, an airborne chemical waste. And then we are throwing the water out there. So half of it's going to get evaporated in the air. The other half of it's going to hit the ground, maybe to be sucked up by plants. But if we've got a situation like I was talking about with the drought and the floods, then what's most likely to happen is that water that you sucked up from the ground is now running off of it, and you're actually just lowering your aquifers more and more and more. And the situation just gets worse and worse, because if the land's not absorbing that rainfall in the first place that creates your droughts, creates your floods, then it sure as hell ain't filling up the aquifers. So every drop you take out of there is a drop that's gone from that. And water doesn't ever go away. It's never gone forever. Okay, it changes, it moves, it goes different places, it becomes different things, but ultimately water's still water, still water, still water. And people talk about, well, if you're going to grow this crop, it takes that much water to do that, and then you get your snowflakes to go off. But oh, you can't do that because it takes so much water to do it. But oh, it takes so much water to raise your livestock. Okay, well, let's consider that. The rain falls, feeds the grass feeds the cow takes the moisture from the grass, poops some of it out, pees some of it out, turns some of it into meat and muscle. Okay, granted that water has been consumed. Well, the moisture eventually evaporates out of the feces, or sinks out of the feces. The urine hopefully sinks into your soil. So that's okay. If it's a dairy cow, a lot of that water is going to go into the dairy that the cattle are producing for human consumption, becomes human urine, becomes water again. Like, it's a big cycle. Water never goes anywhere. Oh, I grew the crop, it took that much water. Okay, yeah, well, most of that water evaporated out through the plant or up from the soil. So it's not gone. You used that much water, sure, but that water's not gone. It's not like you can't reuse it in the future when it falls over on this field as rain, and hopefully gets sucked in by the soil and grows the roots that become the plant that transpires the water that rain. It's supposed to be this beautiful cycle, and we have been trashing that cycle for thousands and thousands of years. So yeah, there is very much the possibility that the Sahara Desert was once the Garden of Eden. There are certain religious texts that suggest that, for example. There is the very real possibility that deserts are not actually supposed to exist. I forget the name of it, but there is a gentleman who goes off in quite detailed explanations, like very, very lengthy, makes me look like I can't really talk at all, about how just these should not exist. I kind of agree with that. I kind of don't. I mean, there are certain environments where it's illogical for a plant to grow. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's too high, it's too, well, I don't know about too low, but too far up in the mountains, is basically your issue there. So, okay, you can get those sort of situations that could be desert-like. Sure. But anywhere kind of below that point on the mountain line, where below the tree line on the mountains, should grow stuff. There should be grass or trees or bushes or something there. And farming, historically, what farming has done is we build a population because we've learned how to produce a crop. And with a surplus of food, you get more breeding because humans are funny that way. We just, well, I can eat. I guess food security is not an issue. Time to procreate. So civilizations, cities grow, and as that city grows, the farms need to produce more. And as those farms produce more, they're degrading the land more and more. So they push out. Okay, well, that's good because the city has grown considerably from the food that the farmers have produced, and it is pushing out. And eventually we get to this point where the land around the city can no longer sustain it. So we get exploration. And that is how the West was won. North America was pretty much explored and discovered for the purposes of exploitation. And they came in addition to all of the animal damage that they did settling North America, and just wiped out huge herds. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's absolutely inexcusable. And I very much understand what people are talking about there. But we also destroyed the grasslands. They talk about riding in there, they're sitting on their horse, and the grass is growing up above their heads. Well, not anymore. That ain't happening now. You know how much nitrogen you'd have to throw on a pasture to get it to grow that tall these days? And if you put that much nitrogen on a pasture, you know how little nutritive value is going to be in that for your animals? This old helmet. Buffalo hunters were heartless. Yeah, truly, truly heartless and wasteful. Oh, I think, there everybody hates this movie. Dances with Wolves. I actually enjoy this movie. The one part of this movie that I really, really don't enjoy is that where they ride over the thing and they're seeing where all the white hunters have come in and just laid waste to the animals, and they're not even using them. And it's just like that. That could grind a person's gears for a good long time, I tell you. The commercial hunters, that is. Yeah, well, right. Commercial hunting is a completely different thing from sustenance hunting. And it's the same with commercial farming versus sustenance farming. Those of us who are interested in providing for our families are going about it in an entirely more ecologically friendly way than those who are interested in producing for the masses. But, and I hate that I can justify this, but industrial farming, be it crops or livestock, has developed over the years to fill a need. See a need, fill a need, like robots, big wells, right? See a need, fill a need. And that's because farmers continually are told that they need to produce more food. They feel that need. They don't just see it, they feel it. They're convinced there is a need. So they're trying everything they can to get a little bit more out of their crop, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Bushels of yield in cropland, or pounds of yield in livestock, or liters in dairy. They're just pushing. They're pushing. They're pushing, and they have to some degree, because otherwise there would be an awful lot of hungry people out there. If everybody that was farming just straight up switched to the new paradigm, there would be food shortages. I don't care what anybody has to say. There would be food shortages, and we would feel them at home, because exports are very rarely messed with as compared to domestic needs. I have noticed, as I go through world history and as I look at current events, that governments 9 times out of 10 are more likely to screw their own people than they are somebody else. Because when you screw your own people, the worst you could face is a revolution. When you screw somebody else, you could be facing trade embargoes. You don't want to face trade embargoes, because then that's your revenue, right? That's where your money's coming from. So you don't mess with that. You don't mess with the income stream. So the money's, the animals, the crops, it's all going in this big circle, round and round and round, but it's not going anywhere. Wes Studi, the Pawnee Warrior, did an amazing job in that movie. Oh, yeah, there were a few incredible actors in that movie, actually. Unfortunately, I don't watch credits, so I don't really know enough names. But yeah, I've seen that movie 100 times, and I still choke up at a few parts of it, and I still get pissed off at a few parts of it. And to me, those are indications of a movie well made. It's any art that makes you feel something is art. And to me, the goal of cinema is motion pictures that make us feel things or help us learn things. Um, so yeah, I get a little choked up sometimes, a little pissed off, and yeah. But the point there, to get back to that, was how we've destroyed the grasslands. Because we came across, and we saw these big, beautiful fields, and we put plow to those puppies, didn't we? Wow, look at the corn we can grow. Wow, look at the amazing crops. And the crops diminished over the years and diminished over the years. And then at one point around World War II, we learned that we can make these interesting synthetics, and we can put these on our field, and we can improve our overall production. So it just made sense to do that. Like, nobody knew of any negatives from it. And you're trying to feed your family, and you're trying to produce food for the rest of the world. So if we can get twice as much by putting this on, then great. But it's become a pattern and a habit of putting all of these little things on, to a point where not only are the farmers' profits practically non-existent, the land can no longer sustain itself. When we don't put all these artificials into our soil and stuff, natural biology takes over. It does what it was designed or it evolved to do, depending on your perspective. And a lot of people think that means that we need to just let land go. It needs to be rested. A lot of land is being rested to death. A lot of people will say we need to keep animals off of the land. It's the animals that are overgrazing, but it's not. It's the resting of the land. So we can't overfeed the land because we're destroying it, and we can't overrest the land because we're destroying it. So somewhere in the middle, you got to walk that middle path, right? So if we disturb the land a little and don't put a bunch of unnatural crap on it, then it kind of starts slowly to develop that natural colony of millions and billions and trillions of bacteria and all of these little microorganisms that, through their predator-prey relationship and through their, in some cases, somewhat parasitic natures of the relationships, like the plants that are living off, or the bacteria that are living off of plant root exudates, that's effectively a parasitic relationship to some degree. But they're, being eaten by other things in there. And then as they decompose, they're becoming food for the plant again. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship, sort of based on parasitic behaviors. We need to be having a mutually beneficial relationship with our landscapes, the same way these bacteria do. It seems so straightforward to somebody just kind of entering into it and learning about it with a childlike wonder, really. That obviously we should follow nature's pattern, and obviously we should use nature's tools to reap the bounties that we can. And that makes sense. But to those who have grown up adding the inputs and okay, I got to spray this, I got to buy this tractor, I got to buy this seed, I got to buy this harvester, I got to buy this seeder. It's just, to them, the new paradigm looks insane, because how can you possibly grow things without fertilizers? That just doesn't make sense. Shouldn't not. More importantly, a mutual relationship with the animals that inhabit the land. I shit you not. Well, there you go. All of it needs to be mutually beneficial. A lot of my speakers seem to come from South Africa and Australia and New Zealand and such. But one of the ideas that I like, that to the best of my knowledge originated from South Africa, was Ubuntu. Probably getting that wrong. But basically, if it's not good for all of us, it's not good for any of us. The concept of how everything needs to be mutually beneficial, or it's just not a good idea. That is how we need to run everything in life. If we can manage our fields that way, is it beneficial to the livestock above and below the soil? Is it beneficial to the plants? Is it beneficial to the microbiology? Is it still benefiting me in my business model? Is it beneficial to everything? Then okay. If any one of these things is being unnecessarily harmed, then it's not a good idea. Even if it's, 1 out of 10 things that's getting harmed, and those 9 other things are going to benefit, it seems like it's a good idea, but there's got to be another way. Nature, God, the creator, however you want to look at it, will have designed another way. We just need to find it. We need to look until we see the solution. And unfortunately, it seems as though as a species, the human being is more inclined to assign blame on something other than themselves and look for another outside source to fix it. It's never us that's done wrong. It's the land is broken. I will add some nitrogen and make the land better. It's not the fact that we are adding nitrogen that's destroying the land. No, no, no. Right? We have that inclination to go, it's something else's fault. We can fix it if we just do something else. No, man, you need to stand back and you need to go, what would happen if we hadn't started fixing things? How would this run in nature? How did this run 1,000 years ago? How did this run 10,000 years ago? Our grasslands have been building up for hundreds and millions of years, like hundreds of thousands and millions. And what do they say, 3.9 billion years or something like that? So we'll just average that out, 4 billion years. Sure, not all of that has been grassland development, but all of that led up to the grasslands that developed. So we need to be, as much as we can, we need to be on top of using those natural solutions and, providing for the animals that are still with us on this planet. And that includes each other. We need to take better care of the human beings that are around us. And that too is part of the reason that I subscribe to the idea of less machines on farms, more people. More people on farms. Oh my God, if you don't have a tractor, it's going to take you 5 people to do this. Great, I'm paying 5 people for their day. They will go out and eat because of this. Instead of me giving John Deere or Case or Macy or whatever a tractor payment, I'm providing for these homes. I'm helping these people eat. That's a good thing. Yeah, tractor salesman got to eat too, and the guy who's making the tractors got to eat too, and there's a whole financial food chain that goes into that too. And I don't want these people to starve any more than I want, the guy who hopefully in the future will be working on my farm to starve. But I do think technology and industry is such that these people can find other jobs if the paradigm shifts to a point where their jobs are no longer needed. They're going to be okay. They've got skills. And a story to tell when it's all done. Yeah, well, when it's all done, that's a scary concept right there. So I'm seeing different names in chat. I'm going to throw this out there again. Has anybody looked into any of the lectures by Johann Zeitsman? Looked into his book, looked into his thoughts on breeding cattle or livestock in general so that they're better conditioned and better for restorative agriculture, regenerative agriculture. Anyone? I mean, if not, and I am happy to keep this going and answer any questions or discuss any opinions anybody might have on this stuff. But if not, I should probably wrap it up. We're getting near the 90-minute mark, and apparently it's my turn to make dinner. Always seems to be my turn to make dinner on Wednesday, but in all fairness, she's leading a dance class, so it's not like she can be making dinner. I think we're going with something super easy tonight, like popcorn chicken. Not my chickens, because I feed them popcorn. I don't make popcorn out of them. But yeah, that'll be a whole interesting thing too. It's going to be up on the farm channel in the future. I don't know if folks are or are not interested in retiring the soup birds, but for the sake of documenting the journey, for the sake of sharing the adventure in homesteading, I will be putting up a video about that. I know a lot of my regular viewers have gotten somewhat attached to those ladies, and there have been quite a few people who have suggested I should let them live until they pass away of a ripe old age. But being in the hog barn has really helped me realize that you do need to cull sometimes for the sake of the animal. And I do feel right now that our 3 retirement hens are suffering and our 10 fresh layer birds are not. So I would rather stop the suffering. So there will be that. That video will be coming in the future. Don't say I didn't warn you. Please don't throw too much hate out there. But it's just the way it is. So, yeah, it's been wonderful to see so many new names in the chat, and I haven't been throwing out wrenches. I got to get a better mouse up here. The one I've got doesn't really work particularly well, so I'm kind of afraid to click the wrong thing and accidentally mute somebody or whatever. But thank you so much for joining me today. I will have a new video up tomorrow discussing yet another speaker in the series, and looking at yet another part of the whole regenerative, restorative agriculture movement. Hopefully, it'll be something that gardeners can benefit from, but I don't know. It might just be more livestock because, well, the more I think about the whole thing, the more I kind of could do that video about vegetarians are killing the planet. And right now, we don't need that kind of controversy going out there in the world. Right now, we need how we can fix the planet and livestock. I think livestock really are the answer to a lot of the land that has been trashed. And I do think, as Punky mentioned a few videos ago, while it would be great to let the land go wild and put the natural species back out there, I don't think that people are going to be happy with the predators. Sure, everybody wants to put the buffalo out there, nobody wants to put the wolves out. It's got to be a package deal. We've got to think about the wholeness of it all. So until society's gotten to a point where they're okay with wolves and they're okay with grizzly bears and wolverines and predators out there, and we understand that we are part of a living system instead of in charge of a living system, it's just not going to happen. So until then, those of us who are willing to raise livestock kind of really, I just want more people to get into the regenerative style of it. And I hope there's a lot more grassland and pasture land rehabilitation going on out there. But until tomorrow's video, I am going to sign off and say thank you all for joining me tonight. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic evening from here on out. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you in future live streams, and always feel free to join in the chat. So take care, everybody, and have yourselves an absolutely fantastic night. All right.